Well, hello, everybody. Dan Sturgis here, and with the enigmatic Dr. Lee across from me. Lee, do you want to wave to
the traditional wave?
All right, excellent. We are here with my new best friend, Matilda Garrido, who is joining us for the very, very first time. And it's our first time to have a guest here at the Merchant's House. We are in the rear parlor of the Merchant's House, and yeah, it's a night of firsts. We almost had a studio audience, but she's not here at the moment, and it's the first time we've got a guest. So this is great. Oh, and we got some people saying hello to us. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right. So now Michelle Garrido.
Matilda.
What did I say, Michelle? Oh my God.
It's okay. It
right
happens
here.
all the
I bet.
time.
I bet
It
Matilda,
happens
which
all
is
the
the
time.
coolest
I've been
name.
called worse. I've been called
Okay.
worse.
All right. All right. Michelle, sorry. Matilda Garrido is, and I thought this was the word I was going to screw up, a thanatologist. Now, Matilda, this is everybody, this is our audience from the Merchant's House.
Hello.
And can you explain to everybody what a thanatologist is?
Sure. So a thanatologist is someone who is educated in death, dying, and bereavement, but the more academic side of it. So we would look at bereavement theory and practice. We would look at issues around brain death. We might veer off into near-death experiences, look at cultural views about death and dying, funeral practices, etc.
And how long have you been doing this? And how do you get into, I don't want to say the business of death, but the business of death? How does that something? How do you get into that?
Well, I think you have to be the kind of person that is attracted to the field. Many people who were my classmates were funeral directors or hospice workers.
Like already before they even started.
Yes. In fact, a number of funeral directors go and get I have a master's in science and thanatology.
Cool.
So you kind of have to be someone who has an interest in working with people who are accompanying the dying, a wish to work with the dying, a wish to work with the bereaved. And I think, generally just a desire to better understand not only death, but how we all feel about death, why we create certain narratives about death, what may or may not be true about death and dying, things like that. But it's very data driven. There's lots of academic research that is done.
So did you have, like you said, there are funeral directors and hospitals. Were you in a field that made you interested in it too, or you just jumped right into it?
No, I wasn't. I was in college, I was a history major, and then I was an administrator at a law school. But I had always been I just had the question in my mind, like, what happens? I don't understand this, and how can it be? And really for myself, I kind of was just like, I don't understand how someone can just not exist anymore. And certainly I probably was also driven by my own death fears, right? Which we all have.
Sure.
Is there even like a term for that, right? It's like, there's a term for people that are like almost overly fearful of death, and they have like rating systems. And
oh, maybe it would be a thanatophobic or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah.
I don't know.
If that's not a word, that should be a word. That was
be a
awesome.
word.
I couldn't get Matilda out. You came up with it was fantastic. We had a question. Oh, okay. Well, Diane, we have Diane and Sarah had said hello to us, and Diane was asking for the name of your profession again, but Sarah helped out.
Sarah's my colleague, actually.
Oh, great. Hey, Sarah. How's it going?
She's a funeral director.
Thanks for
One
sharing
of my
us.
funeral directors.
And you know what? I've spoken about him often. Is the one of the best psychic mediums that I've ever worked with, and the guy that sort of changed my mind. I didn't believe in psychics or mediums at all. And the guy that changed my mind, his name is Richard Scholler, and he's just amazing, and he blows my mind every time I see him do his thing. Was a funeral director beforehand. So he said, I've been dealing with dead people my entire adult life. So so interesting. And have you come across anybody that has discovered an ability for mediumship or some kind of psychic ability?
Oh, I know a couple of mediums, and I have consulted mediums.
And
myself.
through your business, I mean, through your profession?
No,
Oh, okay.
independently.
Oh,
I mean,
alright.
I do have, in networking groups, there are people that colleagues, I would call them,
Mhm.
who feel that they can communicate with
Mhm.
spirit.
All right, cool. And,
Yeah.
before we were talking about the fear of dying, sure, everybody has the fear of dying, but, and we should say, Matilda, that you had reached out. Matilda's also a volunteer here at the Merchant's House. So you want to come in and speak to Matilda? When are you here? You just,
Well, I'm here usually on Thursdays at the
Okay.
front desk, but I'm training to do tours, and I'm training to do ghost tours.
Oh,
So
awesome.
hopefully by October, when we have like
the big
the
ones,
glut
right?
of ghost tours,
Oh,
I'll be
cool.
leading them.
Cool. And everybody watching should come to these ghost
Yes,
tours
should
and
come.
spend some money. But Matilda had reached out and was interested in speaking with Dr. Lee and I, and interested in possibly coming on the show because she watched the last Spirit of Science, and we were talking a lot about hospice
Yes.
and the experience I had with my dad. And just to bring that up again, when we talked about the fear of dying, my dad, once he knew he
Mhm.
wasn't afraid anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that that's probably common. People just sort of settle into it. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think people come to their own. There are some people who resist it. There are
Mhm.
some people who do not resist it. And I think, one of the things about when someone enters hospice is you have to kind of, at least on some level, mentally give up the idea that you're going to be cured,
Right.
as does your family.
Mhm.
And then, as you talked about in the last show, there are common shared experiences that happen to people who are dying, where they will see people who have died before. They will have dreams about those people. They will start to act as though they're preparing for a journey. I had one patient when I was volunteering in hospice who was constantly trying to get out of bed, and this happened to my father too. Like, I need to go, I have to go,
Mhm.
like they're actually preparing for a journey. So all the things that you were saying about that there are definitely things that we cannot explain that happen as people die.
Sure.
And those things might kind of help unify everybody in terms of getting them ready for death too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that people are accompanied into death. I
Yeah.
really do. I mean, I think that, like,
Seems like it's their perspective at the very
it
least.
really does. Yeah.
We talked about this last time when we were giving a pamphlet. My dad was in home hospice.
Oh, I know the pamphlet. I remember you talking, it's called Gone from My Sight, right? Barbara Clarence. Yeah.
And it's pretty much, it tells you
Yeah.
everything what to expect almost from like a month out.
Yeah.
And it was right on the money. It was right on the money. But one of the things they talked about is reaching out, seeing people that are like welcoming them. And my
Mhm.
dad, who was, I don't want to say stoic, but he kept things to himself a lot, but he was reaching out. And I
Yeah.
said, "What are you doing, Dad?" He goes, "I'm stretching my arm, stretching my arm." But
Uh-huh.
but he was focused on that one corner, and
Yeah.
and I would like to think that there were people over there that were welcoming in and taking him to the charter boat so he could go fishing.
Yeah,
Sure,
well,
that's
it's
what
very
it is.
comforting for families to hear this because, typically when someone who's very ill and maybe sort of starting to lose mental capacity
Mhm.
starts talking about that, they think, oh no,
Yeah,
she's
they're going.
really going downhill. It's not far now. And to learn that this is actually a common experience. And, I mean, for all we know, perhaps they are accompanied. It's just very comforting to families to
Yeah,
know
right.
and to have that way of thinking of this.
And in fact, there's a general pattern too of like, sometimes people might be like very non-lucid, they might be unconscious or something, but they'll actually become extremely lucid like
Yes.
right before death, right? And
Yes,
they'll be
that's
like,
called,
oh,
that's called terminal lucidity.
Yeah.
And it really is the last gift to the family.
Yeah,
It's an opportunity to say goodbye, to
Yeah.
have one more experience with your loved one.
Could you explain what that is?
Sure. So terminal lucidity is something that happens. It can happen. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen to someone who has been sort of either sort of unconscious, incoherent. Perhaps it might happen to a dementia patient, where a couple of days before they die, they sort of become themselves again, and they communicate in ways that they haven't been able to communicate for some time. And it can be very alarming for family members who have been
Oh my God, all of a
emotionally,
sudden they're getting better or
yeah,
something.
but emotionally you're preparing for the person to die,
Yeah.
or they can be like, oh my goodness, they're getting better, and then
The
it can be,
rallying.
yeah, it can be deeply disappointing. But again, you know, when I was a hospice volunteer, we try to educate families that like this is normal, and look upon this as really a gift. This is a gift
Right.
for you.
That's pretty interesting. I didn't realize it could happen that far before death. I thought it was usually like minutes or hours before or something.
No,
before
it's usually
Wow.
about 3 days. I
And
think
it
is-
would last during those 3 days, or
It
just
could-
kind of,
No, it could last. I mean, it all really depends,
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
Okay,
It could last a
interesting.
day.
wow, wow, cool.
There's also, you know, you guys talked a little bit about people who wait to die until someone comes,
Yeah.
or this whole idea that like there are people with the dying person all the time, and then someone leaves for 1 minute to
Yeah,
go like
yeah,
sign
that
for
happens,
Chinese
yeah.
food, and then the person dies then. And
Yeah.
Wow.
you know, all that kind of speaks to this idea that, you know, people die when they, in that kind of a situation, they die when they want to die. And
Yeah.
some people don't want to die.
With people in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just want to kind of do it alone, and and it's not
Or
necessarily like-
just, you know, trying to
dislike.
save that
Exactly,
person from
yeah.
something traumatic.
Exactly, it's not
Yeah.
a dislike thing. It's
Because when
like-
people die, it's not like, you know, on TV where they just sort of shut their eyes. Your body is trying to fight. At least in
Yeah.
my experience, my only experience
Yeah.
was the body fighting to stay alive,
Yeah.
whether or not he was conscious of that or not, but
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
body, and it's,
Yeah.
you know, it's rough to watch.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I like to think of it as the person is preparing to take a giant leap off of something, you know, like they're transitioning. Like,
It's like when, you know, like an insect sheds its shell too.
Sure.
It's like, it looks horrific, but it's like, no, it's actually, you know, transforming into something different.
Right.
or, you
Yeah.
know, like, yeah. It's kind of-
mhm.
and you know,
It might be a bad analogy.
has any of your research, you know, we're going to talk about other cultures and how other cultures feel about this, and I'm sure other countries, of course, have hospice and hospice people who work in hospice,
Mhm.
but what is it the same across cultures? You know, would they get the same pamphlet as I got in another country? Or do people in other cultures, other religions, other countries, do they have different experiences as they're going through this transition?
You know, I don't know that they have different experiences, but our experiences, I think, are shaped by our cultures.
Uh-huh.
So in cultures that are not so death phobic, we are such a death phobic culture. For instance, Varanasi in India, which is the big crematory town, they have hospices where people go, you know, when they know they're going to die, and the whole family knows that they're going to die, and it's not a celebration, but it's an acknowledgement of the fact.
Mhm.
So those kind of more mystical experiences are really expected.
Mhm.
Um,
And you brought up India, and India has got, and you know, we touched on this briefly before, just when we first met, about reincarnation. And in India, a lot of we talked about Jim Tucker and Ian Stevenson down at University of Virginia, and Ian Stevenson did extensive research on children in India who were having past life memories.
yes.
And he passed away, and Jim Tucker now is carrying on.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm sure you've done research on reincarnation.
Yes.
And anything you want to touch on about that, because I'm fascinated by that.
Yes, I'm fascinated by it too. And I think one thing that I want to say is, like, I think when we look at different religion and cultural beliefs around what happens after we die, there's sort of two schools of thought, right? There's like the reincarnation school, which is that you come back, you're reincarnated into another physical body, and you are, you know, the like sort of the traditional Hindu model. And I just want to also say that everything that we're saying is really a gross oversimplification. So
Sure,
if
sure.
people if this is your culture or your religion and you want to jump in and correct
Yeah. just
me
write in the
or
comments.
like
Right.
say more, please do so
Absolutely.
on the chat. But so the reincarnation model is like, you're sort of working through karma, you're working through until you can reach the place where you have worked through everything that you need to work through and you enter nirvana.
Mhm.
And then you have the one life sort of model, which is more, I won't even say Judeo-Christian, because some sects in Judaism do believe in reincarnation, but basically Christianity, like you die, you go to heaven or hell or purgatory or some sort of form of stasis until God comes back.
So that's actually considered like and again, gross oversimplification, but that's
Yeah.
considered sort of the end point of that, like when God like returns back to earth, like all the spirits that are in heaven or whatever go somewhere else, or
Well,
just keep showing
so
up?
I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what happens when he comes back. I mean, I know.
Something happens.
I know what
something
the
big.
church. I know what the church says. But yes, I mean, like, something will happen, and people. I suppose. I mean, I don't know what would happen to the people in
They're already
hell,
up there,
if there is,
yeah.
or in purgatory. I guess or limbo. You kind of are able to possibly work through
Yeah.
to get to heaven. But what I think is interesting about those two models is they tell us so much about what we, the living, hope and fear
Mhm.
for about death, right? Like, so I think something that applies to both cases is this idea: we really want to be rewarded for the good things that we've done,
Right.
but we really want to see other people suffer for the bad things that they've done. It's never us, right? But so
Right.
the idea that someone's going to go to hell, or that someone will be reincarnated into like a really bad situation.
It's
Yeah,
true.
here we are, right here.
Yeah.
But so that just tells us like our
That's in
attitudes
our
about death
brains.
tell us
Mhm.
about ourselves.
Yeah. Interesting. Is that so in the reincarnation belief, the equivalent of like hell is like you just get reincarnated into something that's more annoying to be, or just not at all, or what's
Well,
the
you would
equivalent?
get reincarnated into a life, a more painful
Yeah,
existence.
which would be like what?
And it
a
would,
bug
and
or
it would
something?
actually, I think a comforting thing for us to think about reincarnation is like, oh, I won't die, like I'll come back. But
Yeah.
actually, if you believe in reincarnation, the whole point is to stop reincarnating.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
you don't
because
want to keep
this is
reincarnating.
not-
Right, you
Pleasant
want
part,
to end up at the goal, and I guess God is giving you chances to redeem yourself from
Yeah.
your previous life, and so you can work your way up.
Yeah.
I don't want to say ladder, because then
Mhm.
Scientologists will come
Right.
running after
They
us,
believe in
but-
reincarnation.
Oh, yeah? Oh, well, yeah, I guess the whole thing is based on that, right? But, and what, is there like a physical model of what happens to you or to a person that is reincarnated? How does that happen? Is that, I've heard people who have had organ implants, and they have memories or past life memories of the person who donated their organs, which is amazing. Or they might have a desire for French food that they've never ever liked before. And when we're talking about reincarnation, we're talking about a whole nother life, and it's usually younger children, that they'll start, as soon as they can start speaking, they will start talking about, my wife in another town, or my children, or how I died. And that goes up until like 5 or 6 years old, where whether those memories just fade, or we are conditioned to not believe that's even possible. So you just say, well, I'm just having, my imagination. Is there, like, how does that happen? Is that the soul, choosing where to go? Because we talked a little bit about a particular case where the little boy says, that's I was floating around, and that's where I saw you and wanted to be with you.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's beautiful to think that. I think that I think it probably, unfortunately, is not so self-directed. I mean, I think we're kind of, I'm speaking as if this is the truth. I personally tend to sort of veer towards that model.
Towards the model
of reincarnation over like the one
Yeah.
life model. I think that there's some sort of order to this where I think we're placed where we may have an opportunity to work out our karma.
Mhm.
If you're getting into more like, it's not so formalized in a religious sense. The whole idea of soul contracts, that you reincarnate with the same group of people all of the time, and you kind of like almost sit down and have a meeting. And I'd say like, okay, Dan, like in the next life, I promise to, hurt you really badly so that you can forgive me and you can earn your forgiveness reincarnation
I never knew
back.
about that aspect. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it's really like new age. It's not a formalized religious.
So that's not part of necessarily Buddhism or
No.
Judaism. Okay.
So I'm going to wait, Lee, to pay you back that $20.
Yeah, right. I'll get you in the next life.
Yeah, well, you say like, I agree to teach you this lesson in this life, and then I would say, okay, well, so
Got it,
I
yeah.
agree to do this
So you're
for
both
you.
working, you're forming like a team to
Yeah.
help advance into the nirvana as quickly as possible without all this crap.
Right.
It's like, let's make this more efficient, guys. We gotta
Cut
make
out
a
the
system.
middleman. Let's just get
Yeah, we
there.
gotta make a system.
And there has been no academic
It's such an
research
ego
on that.
thing.
I mean,
That's
we
such
have
an ego-
academic research on
Isn't that such a
reincarnation, but
person thing? Isn't that such a human thing where, you know what? This is some kind of like divine miracle that we can be, but we're going to streamline it. We're going to fix it
Right.
so it's better for us.
Yeah.
Diagrams, like flow charts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And Zoom calls.
yes.
Jeez. Now that case I was talking about, the little boy, and Leah, I'm sure you've come across this. What was his name again? It was.
Are we talking about James Leininger?
Yes, we are. Yes,
Mhm.
we are. Thank you. I was going to say Jeff because I'm getting all names wrong. But he was a little boy in California.
He was in Texas, actually. Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas.
Well, I boned up before I
Okay,
came
all
on
right,
because
all right.
I suspected we would be discussing.
Take it away, Matilda. Take it away.
No, so one of the theories that people use to discount reincarnation in Hindu cultures is that because the belief is so strong, it's sort of the power of suggestion that parents are looking for these signs in their children. Children want to please their parents and they're
Yeah.
aware of it. But there was a very famous case. He's only 22 now. In the United States, a little boy called James Leininger.
And
In
that's his
Dallas,
actual
Texas.
Name, thought of made up name.
That's his real name. Who at around the age of 2, after his father had taken him to a museum of aeronautics, started talking about that he had once been in a plane, he had crashed, he had died in a plane. He started talking more and more. He became actually a little bit obsessed with planes, and he started actually throwing out names, and he was having nightmares saying, I'm dying, I'm burning up. And so the parents did a lot of research, and this is again oversimplifying. They were able to identify the names that he spoke of. And
Right, didn't he named his GI Joes.
Yeah,
But
he named them actual people.
Right.
Like he
Yeah,
named them
historically,
other service. So they believe that he believes, his family believes. And again, the Institute of Perceptual Studies has investigated this and feels that there is strong, its evidence is always circumstantial, but there's very strong evidence, like circumstantial evidence, that this could really have happened, that he really could be a reincarnation of a World War II pilot who went down in Japan in World War II.
yeah, in a harbor whose name was James as well.
Yes, his name was James.
And and I think James, the little boy, had an unnatural sort of fear of water. And this plane was shot down apparently and landed into the water. So not exactly sure if the pilot was killed on impact or drowned, which, frightening.
Yeah.
But he had a real fear of water when they would give him a bath, and just remarkable stuff. And now they reached out to the pilot's sister, and she spoke to this
Yes.
little boy on the phone. And I think he brought up a painting that that the pilot and this older woman's now mom had painted a picture of the two of them, and she sent it to him. She said, "I was speaking to my brother." And she considered him, and I don't know if she's still around, but I just got goosebumps, but she
Yeah.
considered him
Yeah,
her brother.
her brother.
Amazing.
That's,
amazing.
yeah, the cool part about that story is like, you know, you can have suggestion like, hey, maybe you had a past life, kid, and then he makes up stuff. But this is like bring up details that, you know, presumably nobody
Real
gave him.
specific, like
Exactly,
naming
yeah,
these GI Joes, and they weren't like, you know, Bob and John. They were
First and last name.
first and last names, and it was
Yeah.
they weren't names that like a little
Yeah,
3
yeah,
or
yeah,
4-year-old
come
would
up
come
with.
up with.
Yeah.
Talking about names of like the type of plane that he had flown,
Right.
which is no longer in use, and
Right.
he couldn't read, so he couldn't have looked this up, and his
Yeah.
parents or anybody who that like he had contact with had never even heard of this kind of plane. And so, you know, again, once again, circumstantial, but
Yeah, really intriguing. Yeah.
a lot of it can't be explained fully away.
And the way he described the hotel that his parents went to on their honeymoon, and I guess he was conceived in Hawaii. It was, and
Mhm.
he described a pink hotel, and he said he was flying around in heaven.
Oh, and he like,
And that's what he
knows that
chose,
right into the body. Yeah.
But you know, I've talked to people, and when they speak about reincarnation, they talk about, you know, like on a cellular level or DNA level, how it's possible, you know, the three of us are sitting here speaking and talking, and you know, we've got dead skin cells that are flying off, and we're inhaling each other's person. And can that somehow, you know, will I be able to, would it be possible for me to pick up a past memory from you
Yeah.
because I have some of you, you know, in me now?
That's
And
so
is that how
interesting.
like mediums and psychics work?
I don't know.
You know?
That's so, and I've never heard that, but that's very, very interesting. I mean, I would say like, if that's true, rather than debunking mediums
Mhm.
and psychics, it actually would sort of go to support that.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, I've never had a reading. I've never had a psychic reading or a medium reading. I've been in the room, of course, and watched it happen, and fascinated. But Richard Scholler, who I was talking about earlier, we were disagreeing on something here at the Merchant's House upstairs in one of the offices, and we were disagreeing on, you know, he says, I see them, and I'm like, well, I don't know if you see them. I think you more perceive them.
Yeah.
And you know, we're talking about frequencies, and he said, Dan, can I do a little reading on you? And I said, yeah, sure. And it freaked me out, and it was just a quick little 5-minute thing. But I'm saying, are you getting that from me, or is my grandmother's spirit really behind me?
Uh-huh.
Or are you just getting that information from me because I have my grandmother, I'm connected to her.
Right.
So are you just reading me, or are you really seeing the spirit of my grandmother? And he said, who knows? I don't know. It's cool either way. And,
Yeah.
and I believe
Sure.
that, and you know, he got information that I didn't know.
Yeah. And
But-
so that's like, yeah, and just like from the scientific perspective, like that's really interesting. And it's kind of like using the word genetic as just kind of like an analogy for like you said, there's some information that's somehow like tied to you, and you're not necessarily saying it's like in your genes, like
Right.
in terms of like the base pairs and stuff.
Right.
But yeah, like it's somehow integrated, encoded into your body
Right.
in some way that maybe we haven't discovered yet. You know, which is
Right.
pretty
And is
interesting
that
and
what is that what a psychic or a medium is actually doing when they're
Yeah.
speaking to somebody? Now, people out on the Windbridge Institute, I don't know if you've come across them.
No.
The Windbridge Institute out west, they're doing fascinating work on mediumship, and you know, a situation like that where they're doing 5 blinds, you know, where
Yeah.
nobody knows how they're going to get in touch with somebody until it happens. How do you get that information if you're it's just crazy stuff.
Yeah,
Man.
it gets even
I can't even
weirder.
ask the question.
Exactly. Yeah, it gets even more interesting. Like, you know, when you consider that sometimes people do this stuff not with the person in front of them, right? It's like through the phone.
Over the
video,
phone,
whatever.
or-
So
Mhm.
if that's indeed true, then that makes it even more interesting. You know, like how would that information be conveyed through
Right.
an electronic piece of equipment which doesn't have any cells, any living things in it? You know, how would you? Yeah.
Yeah, and
weird
it's
and
not
interesting.
not biased. It's not, you know,
Yeah.
conditioned to.
Yeah, so you know, that's the kind of stuff I find interesting in terms of, like we were talking about, everything's circumstantial, but there are sort of different levels too, right? It's like one can be circumstantial, but even if it's totally true, it could be explained through some mechanism that the person hadn't thought of, right? It's like maybe you suggested to the kid that he was reincarnated and that's why he thinks that, right?
Right.
And that way, like, it's true, but you know, but meanwhile, there's the other way where the only explanation is like these people are lying or somebody's lying, right? And I like that kind of stuff because once you get to that stage, you know, you can just say in your mind, okay, let's just assume this person's not lying, and like if all this is true, then it is something super intriguing, you know. And you can't just go around just saying well, you can go around saying every single person lying that's saying this, but it becomes less and less probable the more people you get coming and saying that.
Mhm.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
So
right. And I feel like, I mean, I think it's good for us to try to figure this out, but I just don't know that we'll ever know for sure. I don't know that anything will ever be able to be scientifically proven, because I'm just not sure we're supposed to know, like,
I think it's, well, yeah, I mean, that's part of why I'm here. I mean, I think it's possible. And I mean, I think there's tons of stuff that we know now that people used to think we weren't supposed to know.
Right.
know?
Thunder. I use an example of thunder and lightning. Thunder and lightning was paranormal way longer
Yeah, yeah.
than it hasn't been paranormal.
Right,
for
right.
thousands and thousands of years, where
And
people were.
along those lines, even more specifically, ball lightning, which is a form of lightning, has
Mhm.
been seen since the beginning of time by humans because it's a physical phenomenon, so it must have existed. And yet it hadn't been recorded and really believed by mainstream science until like maybe a couple of years ago, when it was
Mhm.
first actually recorded on a camera
Mhm.
by accident, because it's so rare, right?
Yeah,
So yeah, there's things that I don't see any reason why we wouldn't be able to discover it. There's so much weird stuff that doesn't make any sense being discovered. Well, it doesn't make any common sense being discovered in physics every day, that it's just bizarre and weird, and like most people don't even know about it. So there's already plenty of almost weirder stuff that's being discovered in science.
Yeah.
I read today about quantum effects, and how we were talking about if you affect one cell, the other cell in another area instantaneously is affected and reacts.
Yeah.
But now they're saying no, there's a time gap. It's infinitesimal,
Mhm.
That I haven't seen.
but there is time. I just read it today.
Oh,
I just
that's
read it today. But it just the fact that you could measure that time to figure out that there's a time.
So
That's
interestingly, I mean, what you said, like, you change one cell and the other cell changes. So even that is like a recent thing, right?
Mhm.
So, somewhat recently, nobody thought that kind of instantaneous connection between entities could exist above like a subatomic level, right? So it's not, you have to have just these tiny little particles, and only they're able to have this connection. But recently it's been discovered you can have these, clouds of particles be associated with each other in that way, where you can affect one, the other one instantly gets affected. So
Right.
it's slowly getting us closer to this possibility of like entire entities, like you might be somehow connected to your grandmother or whatever, or something else.
Yeah.
yeah.
Or what about how the fluidity of time, like we look at a star, but what we're actually seeing is like 5 million years
Yeah,
ago. And so that, what I think
Right.
about a lot is how that would play into something like a residual haunting, right? Footsteps we might hear, like did something just go awry for one moment and we're in the same time space that was actually 100 years apart,
Right.
or something like that?
Yeah, I had a mind-blowing conversation with somebody one time, and they were talking about just wavelengths, and maybe, at some point a wavelength might just intersect.
Mhm.
And, on a dimensional level, I don't want to get too crazy, but I'll experience something that I've never experienced before, and maybe not ever experience again, and they might experience me or perceive me at the same time. So
And I'll say too, I mean, myself included, like, well, at least I'll say for myself, I personally am not a physicist. I'm not amazing at physics, and I don't know your guys' experience, but
No.
right now we're all So right now, basically, all three of us in the room.
the last 5 minutes has been my experience.
So right now, all three of us in the room are hand waving, but like I said before, there's so much weird stuff being discovered in mainstream physics research that like hand waving is kind of allowed even in physics. It's like there's so many weird theories that are possible realities, parallel dimensions, etc. And if those are true, all kinds of weird stuff could happen. Like you could occasionally have the dimensions interact, and possibly, who knows?
Yeah.
And again, like I'm not a physicist, but weirder stuff is known to already be happening in science. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, Dr. Lee, like what would it take for science to sort of give credibility to the theory of ghosts or poltergeists?
So the one thing is the biggest thing really is like we talked about before, is like the mechanism, right? That's part of why there's this resistance, right? So it's like, how can this that's the sort of the answer you would get from science. How is this possible, right? It's like, oh, this kid seems like he was reincarnated. Okay, how is this possible? And they'll just stop at that, right? If you can't have any kind of mechanism, like Dan was talking about, like, oh, maybe somehow the DNA was imprinted, but like, again, that was an analogy, like the DNA most likely is not imprinted. Like if they test that kid's DNA, I hugely doubt it's the same DNA as this pilot that died. It just wouldn't make any sense.
Right, exactly.
But there might be some kind of thing in his cells, maybe, some kind of information somehow encoded in there that is the same as this pilot that died, right?
Mhm.
And unfortunately, the pilot's gone, so we can't
Right,
test that.
and
but
could
we
it
can test
actually,
that in the future.
could
But
his,
now we could,
Exactly,
right? Now
exactly.
we could.
could one of his parents have that information and just pass it along to him, and he was
Maybe.
able to decode it, or
Mhm.
young enough to not judge it,
Yeah.
and be
Yeah.
conditioned.
Exactly. So what you would have to say is there has to, for that to be true, for this story to be true, there has to be information encoded somehow in
Mhm.
that kid's body, brain, whatever,
Mhm.
that was shared, that came from or somehow was equivalent to the information that was in that pilot's body or brain or whatever.
Mhm.
So the key would be to discover that where that information is and find that association, right?
Right.
So it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's theoretically possible, right?
Mhm.
And we are always finding, new ways in which information is encoded in all kinds of stuff, right? Even, DNA is one good example. And then even in neurons in the brain, we're still trying to, when you record from the brain, you see all these activations of the neurons, but like, we're still trying to discover like how those little blips of neurons firing are actually encoding the information of what we see and everything like that, right? We still don't even understand that. And there's a whole class of science called information theory that's just all about that, right? It's just basically saying everything is information, and it's just, trying to understand how things are encoded and how they may be related.
Mhm.
So it's an intriguing possibility, and maybe somebody that's watching the show can become a scientist and find how that information is actually encoded in our bodies or brains.
Yeah, hurry up.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions? We seriously went off topic with what the show was supposed to be. I don't even know. What the
Yeah,
show was
well,
supposed to be.
we're on topic for
Yeah,
a
yeah.
couple minutes.
Well, we could, what we could talk about is, so we're talking about like the afterlife, but what about like where are spirits?
Yeah, so that's something
culturally
I was trying to look into too, because
Mhm.
like when you talk about reincarnation or all these other things, it's like, okay, well, where do ghosts fit into some of those, religious theories, cultural theories, or whatever? And if they do, how,
Yeah,
And that's pretty intriguing.
it is. And I think the saddest thing that I've been able to glean from the research that I've done about ghosts, right? Not spirits, not poltergeists or entities.
That alone is an interesting distinction that maybe we should get into, because honestly,
Yeah.
even in my mind, it's a little cloudy, right? It's like, what does distinguish a quote unquote ghost from a spirit, right?
Yeah, well, so I would think of a ghost as like a person, right? A person who at one time had a human form, and we can identify them. That's my mother, or that's Gertrude, or that's whoever. Whereas a poltergeist doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a persona.
Well, a poltergeist, if we're gonna,
You know so much more about poltergeists than I do.
I try and stay on a, I don't want to say scientific and insult Lee, but I try and look at things more scientifically, and I always refer back to the Parapsychology Association, Parapsychology Foundation, and look at their models. And when we're talking about a poltergeist, and I actually run into trouble with this with the show, because poltergeist means different things to different people. But for the scientists that are studying this, the Lloyd Auerbachs that are studying this poltergeist phenomena, it's just a name. It's actually recurring spontaneous psychokinesis, and it's not coming from a spirit. When we talk about poltergeist effect, if my hat flew off over here, that's a decent example of poltergeist activity. It's not a ghost.
It doesn't have its own free will.
Yeah, no, it's coming from a human agent who is under some kind of stress that they can't express outwardly or publicly, whatever the case may be, and it's more internal, like a mental temper tantrum, and that energy and that expression has to get out somehow. And you can usually tell who the human agent is by what things are being affected. If it's the stereo keeps going on, and hair dryers might be point to a teenager, or the tool shed, the tools in the tool shed keep going off. That might be dad,
Right.
So
It's mom
to the viewers, yeah, this might sound like crazy and like Dan's just going out, but like, so this is actually really interesting because this is one of the theories that was formed through actual scientific investigation, right?
Mhm.
So there would be poltergeist activity occurring in a town or something, it gets in the news, and then people that are interested in researching this would go there and they would study the phenomenon and be like, what's going on, right? And they would see something fly around or something, and they slowly start actually mapping out, so like rooms and like where the activity would happen,
Mhm.
who was in the room, their proximity to the activity, and so they gradually just found this association or a correlation between that in general, when poltergeist activity occurred, wherever it occurred and whenever it occurred, it seemed to be, like you said, associated with, there was usually like a teenager-ish, going through puberty timeline,
Right.
Yeah.
child in the house at that time.
Right.
And just from that simple correlation, like that's like a statistical correlation, like that's not made up. And then from that, you can make these theories of like, okay, well, it's somehow tied to them, like maybe they're causing it, right? Or
Right.
maybe for some reason, like a particular type of throwy ghost likes to hang out around pubescent children, but that's a little bit more complicated and
Mhm.
doesn't make as much sense. So yeah, that's a really interesting example of like using science, just a simple correlation of like, this happens with this at the same time, so they're
Yeah.
somehow correlated,
Right.
somehow
Yeah.
cause and effect maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so poltergeist, and that's one of the things in the ghost world, and also in the parapsychology world, where we've got a lot of, again, going off on another tangent here, but you've got a lot of people out there in
Okay.
ghost groups, and they're using different terminology,
Yeah.
terminology that makes sense to
Yes.
them.
Yeah.
But if you want to be taken seriously as a science, and which would be amazing,
Mhm.
I think everybody's got to get on the same page. And when I say poltergeist, when you say poltergeist, we're talking about the same thing.
Right, because I was thinking more of like the Enfield poltergeist,
Mhm.
which actually probably is more of like an entity, right?
I'm not
Rather
actually-
than,
I don't know what you mean, Enfield.
oh, so that was
It's a
a-
famous poltergeist case.
Oh,
in
okay.
England,
In
and
England,
it was like a vicious poltergeist. It was a destructive
Mhm.
poltergeist,
Okay.
like the movie
It happened like
poltergeist.
in
Yeah.
Enfield family's house or something?
No,
or
it happened in
That was a
Enfield.
town.
Enfield town.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing, when we're doing the show and we're watching clips, we're responding on the clips. If we get a clip from the UK and they're talking about a poltergeist, they're talking about something completely different.
Yeah,
So it's hard when somebody said, "Do you think that's poltergeist?" And I'm like, well, I don't know what he means.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
seems like
yeah,
he's
yeah.
dealing with some kind of
Yeah, I mean, but in general, I think the common theme is like stuff is flying around.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like the core of what the hell's happening. And then like what might be causing that might be different in different situations or whatever. But yeah, that's kind of the core of like.
yeah knocks
It's
on the
called
walls,
poltergeist. Yeah.
things moving, and
Yeah.
things disappearing, not aporting, but you can't find your keys. And
Yeah.
oh, they're here now. They're here
trickster.
right now,
A trickster.
but we do a lot of electronic things, the interference with electronics, which is I've read that the military branches of the military are doing research on people's stress levels affecting electronics, which is poltergeist effect, which is
Yeah.
recurring spontaneous psychokinesis, mind over matter. And I mean, just imagine a tank battle or a submarine. Those stresses, and you're
Yeah,
relying on
yeah.
electronics to make your way through
Yeah.
the ocean,
Yeah.
and you're under an enormous amount of stress. And could that stress affect your compass? Or
Yeah.
just imagine what could go wrong.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, I know there's a whole bunch of studies with they're just trying to look at like what's the easiest way that you'd be able to detect that, and like they're using random number generators and they put it in the same room and then that person try to influence it or whatever. Those run into interesting issues because at least with that paradigm of experiment, because random number generators, they rely on some kind of random process that generates these numbers, and sometimes that's like radioactive decay or whatever, different things. But the problem is a lot of those mechanisms that are used to create these random numbers they're influenced by temperature, humidity of the room, everything. So like, and this is just kind of helping the viewers like think of how they would devise their own experiments and do it scientifically too. So if I put a random number generator in my lap and then the experiment is like influence this, I might just be like getting tense and my body's heating up, and just that slight like 0.1 degree change in temperature at the random number generator would be actually influencing and causing it to maybe no longer be random, or deviate the numbers a little bit. So there's so many things you have to control for to really like detect. There's a lot of things that can contaminate it that make it look like it's a psychic effect when it's not. Although some studies that have controlled for all of those things as much as they can still do see some interesting effects.
Yeah, the Global Consciousness Project with Roger Nelson, and who I know. We should get him on one time, because he's just amazing things what he's doing, and it was at the Princeton lab. He headed that for a long, long time.
Nice.
I've got a couple of questions that let's see, that some people are asking. You've got a lot of fans, Matilda. I don't think you're deaf, but let's see here. Is it safe to say a ghost or poltergeist is an energy?
You have to say there's energy involved, because things are moving
I would
around.
say that that's safe to say. But I mean, especially in poltergeist phenomena, when we talk about ghosts, we're talking about the consciousness that has survived bodily death. So we're just talking about somebody's consciousness, which you could argue is just energy. You could argue, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, but especially with poltergeist things, you could even more assuredly say energy is involved, because things are moving, and at least based on physical theory, like if things are moving, energy has to be transferred to that thing to make it move. So we don't know what that thing is that gave it energy, but maybe it's aliens, maybe it's a laser beam, who knows? But like, some energy is somehow involved in it.
There is, I brought it up a couple times, and I don't feel funny bringing it up, but the movie Ghost is real. It's real sort of right on when they talk about some stuff. And there's that scene in the subway when Ghost is trying to teach Patrick Swayze's ghost how to touch something. And of course they're using their finger, because that's what they think they still have, but they don't have a body anymore. And it's just they're saying just focus and concentrate, and he's finally able to do it. And that's sort of the same thing, that that was energy. That's energy that's got to move something.
Yeah, I think the thing about ghosts is so much of the lore around ghosts is that being a ghost is a sad thing, right? People become ghosts, certain cultures believe, because they were not buried properly.
Exactly.
Or the ancient Greeks, they didn't have enough money to pay the ferryman and things like that. So
like they're hanging around for a reason that's usually a not great reason.
Not a good one. Like they somehow haven't been able to transition over to the next thing. But I mean, I wonder if that's true. I mean,
who knows? Exactly.
Who knows?
But like you said, that is, I think, the way a lot of religions think about it. Like, but that might be mostly because the ghosts that you notice are like the annoying ones or the scary ones or whatever, and there might be plenty of other ghosts that just you don't give a crap about, and they don't scare you or anything, and they're just pleasant ghosts.
Right, and we're afraid of things we don't understand.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got something happening in our house, we don't understand it. Of course, you're going to be afraid of it. And it might just be Gertrude just wanting to say, hey, I need somebody to talk to.
Right.
And I make that silly, but I think that's true.
Yeah.
And we've certainly seen it here at the merchant's house, where I'm sure in the very, very beginning, we can talk to people that have been here for a long time, Anthony Bello, where people were probably afraid by what was happening. And until somebody comes in, maybe a ghost hunting group, or somebody does a little research and realizes, what, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I don't think, ghosts are evil. I think again, it's the consciousness of somebody who's survived bodily death.
So interestingly, in doing this research, I found something that I had never. It's sort of another parallel to that, which is like we're still talking about ghosts as if it's a spirit from a body that passed away. But at least from my research of Islam, they believe in jinns.
Yeah.
They believe actually that it's like just to quote what it says, they're another creation of Allah that live in a world parallel to humans. So they weren't actually ever human spirits. They're just kind of a parallel, invisible thing that walks around on the world.
Right. Yeah. And so the jinn are not necessarily evil, but we can think about what we consider evil entities, right?
Right.
that sort of,
Basically, they do stuff that we don't like, whether or not they are doing it to intentionally cause harm.
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
well, with the jinn, yes. I mean, no one wants the jinn around, really. There's an acknowledgement that they exist, but
Okay.
but they're
I've
not
enjoyed
sort of
plenty of
welcome
gin,
guests at
and
the
I like
dinner
when it's
table.
around.
Yeah, but you know, in terms of like, so if we're talking ghosts, spirits, and then entities,
Yeah.
you know, the M. Scott Peck, who's a famous psychiatrist, wrote the book called A Road Less Traveled.
Mhm.
Actually, shortly after he wrote that book, he wrote a book called People of the Lie, which is kind of an exploration of evil and how evil might show up. This was before.
Just in general, in humanity, or
In humanity,
Yeah, okay,
yeah, in
yeah.
humanity, and where it comes from,
Yeah.
and how it's perpetuated.
Yeah.
But then later on in his life, he actually became an attending psychiatrist at exorcisms. And wrote a book, which the name escapes me now, something like In the Presence of the Devil or something like that, and describes 3 exorcisms that he was actually present at. One of them he officiated at, and this is a scientist, he's a psychiatrist, he spent his life doing this.
Yeah.
And he, you know, really felt strongly that there is something to this idea of that there is evil that exists in
As its own entity that can kind of
Yeah.
influence
Right.
almost.
It's great. We have a question, but aren't demons different than poltergeists and ghosts? And well, yes. And when you start talking about demons, you start talking about religion,
Yeah.
which gets you away from parapsychology. And I like to stay the course, but I assisted on a solemn exorcism in the Bronx. Solemn being it was given the go-ahead by the bishop, and that's a solemn exorcism. And the way they work, you have to have a doctor, you have to have a priest, the priest has to have an assistant, and then you need 2 other people there to hold somebody down if need be, or if somebody's attacked, just to like bouncers.
Yeah.
And I went to one,
Were
and
you the bouncer?
one of the bouncers, yeah. And I think the stuff that I was watching was poltergeist effect. You know, somebody under an enormous amount of strain, who I think she really believed, and of course it was a girl, I think she really believed that she was possessed. In my opinion, and it's just my opinion,
Which would help that phenomenon.
Yeah,
it makes you
100%,
stressed out
yeah.
and- yeah.
in my opinion, I don't think the devil was inside her.
Mhm.
But I
Exactly.
think she believed it enough that was
Exactly.
happening, and then she believed in the exorcism, she believed in the priest, that it stopped.
Yeah.
And so
That brings up a great point related to that question, which is like, if somebody says there's like a devil doing XYZ, it's like, how the heck do they know? Like, they're just seeing what it's doing.
Mhm.
It could be an invisible alien, it could be a, you know, pubescent kid, it could be the spirit of your grandma, whatever. Like, all you're seeing is its end effect, and like, it might be a legit devil too, with like goat hooves or whatever, but we don't really know, right? And just because somebody throws that label at it, who knows, right? We're still trying to learn what this stuff may or
you
may
know,
not be.
when I was talking to the person that was assisting the priest, you know, I said, and he said, what do you think, Dan? And I was like, you know, I don't know, because my mind wants to go this way, but could it just been? And he goes, what's the difference? What's the difference? Her devil, you know.
Well, that's the thing.
Her
From the
devil
scientific perspective, it's interesting because the difference is the mechanism, right?
Yeah.
Which is really the really intriguing part, right?
Right.
It's like understanding like, how is this mechanism, what is causing this effect, right? It's like, yeah, from the police perspective, they just care about the effect and stopping the effect, right? However they do it, whether they put some holy water or do a cross, whatever, that's their job, right?
burn sage.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
But it would be intriguing, like if burning sage does work, you know, how does that work? If like holy water works, how does it work? Is it a psychological thing that affects, like you said, like you know, the child causing this effect with their brains, or is it some other way? You know, it's intriguing. Yeah.
Well, wow, we're almost at an hour. That went fast.
Time flies.
Well, it was great. It was great having you here,
Thank
Matilda.
you so much.
You know, Lee, I'm
I
sure
enjoyed it.
you're more than
this was a lot of
welcome
fun.
to show up as much as you like.
Great.
Especially now you're here at the Merchant's House. And you know what everybody's got to do. You know, the Merchant's House, for people who don't know, Merchant's House built in 1832. The Treadwells moved in 1835. Gertrude was born in 1840. But only one person lived in this house. And one family ate at that table. And one family enjoyed all this beautiful, beautiful house, this home, and you guys have got to come to see what the Treadwells lived in, and their beautiful furniture. Everything in the house is original to the house. So when you walk in here, you're walking into a time capsule, and you're seeing how people in the 1800s lived. And Gertrude passed away in 1933, so most of her life was spent here, and it's amazing. And the Merchant's House is battling this evil company who wants to put a hotel right next door, and what's that?
They might be possessed.
They might be possessed. They've been possessed by money, and the Merchant's House has been fighting just nobly against these people, and who want to build this monstrosity hotel that would wreck the Merchant's House. We've got, you guys can't see it, but there's all this beautiful crown molding. Go for it, Lee. And I mean, look at this stuff. It would all crumble.
And Dan, another point I'd like to make that speaks to that is that there's repair work that we would like to do, but we're not going to spend a significant amount of money doing repair work when we may have to just, scaffold the entire building if this development does go through next door.
Yeah, it really is.
So it's really a pity, because we can't even do things that we would want to do to preserve the environment now.
So, we have to urge everybody to come by the Merchant's House, pay a couple of bucks, throw a couple of bucks in the bird cage, and help this beautiful. Everybody's volunteering here. Nobody gets paid. It's just for the love of the house. So come in and show the Merchant's House some love. Come on a ghost tour. Matilda's going to be doing ghost tours in October, and come on the ghost tours. And
plenty of questions, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I pop up every once in a while at the ghost tours. So come in and say hi, and spend a couple of bucks, and it's money well spent. It's money well spent, and will go to good use to preserving the house, keeping the house running, and letting us tell stories while you guys are watching. So again, want to thank everybody. Holy cow, we got 6 more messages. Hold on one second. It's all about Matilda. Hi everyone. Hi Diane. Let's see. Thanks so much. Had a great time. Really enjoyed the talk tonight. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah Moss. Is that somebody you know?
Yeah, that's my funeral director friend, my good friend and colleague.
Thanks for coming, Sarah. We're going to have you every week because you bring the people in. And Lee and I have Anthony, Pi, my mom, and Martha, who's our studio audience.
It's my family.
Well, hello, Matilda's family. You're lucky to have Matilda as a member of your family. She's a lovely, lovely lady, and just as lovely as you are.
Thanks to everybody for supporting and showing up. And this is a great cause. It's a beautiful place, so important in New York City history. It cannot be duplicated. There literally is nothing like it.
Final word, Lee?
No, just thanks for this is a great show, and it's a lot of fun. And thanks for watching, everybody.
We'll leave it at that. Thanks for watching, everybody. There you go. Good night, everybody. Again, thanks for watching, and stay safe and be well.